Hello and welcome. It is December 17th, 2025. This is the last show we're going to be doing of the year. We're taking a couple of weeks off. A lot happened this last week. We're going to try to get into that some today. We had our first snow here in Maryland recently, and it's been cold the last couple of days. What's it like? What are you thinking about this snow in December? Are we back? Are we back to like having normal winters?
Yeah, and it stuck and it stayed on the ground for a while. And I was just, out at a protest at Hopkins, and I was making sure I wasn't going to slip on the ice. So yeah, it's good. The seasons are good. We should have seasons in Maryland.
Seasons are good. We are going to stand by that. That's a campaign position that you can take to the bank. We're going to be arguing seasons are good, and we should do what we need to preserve them. I lived in Southern California for a while. I lived out there in Long Beach. There's a lot that is great about Long Beach. It's long. It's a beach. It's in Southern California. Cal State Long Beach, one of my favorite of the Cal States, is there. But the seasons, there's just no seasons. There's cold season there's wet season and dry season. That's it.
Yeah, Maryland has seasons, and they come in slightly different times. When I was up in the mountains, it was definitely more winter earlier, and that's great. We should celebrate that. We should ride for that. And if we do what we need to do to address the climate crisis, hopefully we'll have seasons for many generations to come here.
Indeed. Seasons for generations to come, the Maryland we deserve. So we're not getting into that tonight, but that will definitely be a topic we talk about starting next year. We're going to talk about climate stuff quite a bit. So what we are going to talk about tonight, we're going to get into a couple of things. So there was a special session of the General Assembly yesterday. We'll talk a little bit about that. There's a new Speaker of the House in Maryland and some veto overrides of some Westmore vetoes. We'll get into that a little bit. Owen's got a story about a protest that he was just at and some issues with immigration, or some issues with education and immigration here in Maryland. And then our guest tonight is another one of the people on our campaign team, a campaign volunteer, Christy Frink. She's going to come on and talk about some of the research that she's been doing and some of the tools she's been putting together to help our campaign dig through all the documents that are available on our elected officials and our government in order to have some transparency. So I think there's a lot of good stuff to talk about tonight. And then at the end, Owen and I will do a little bit of, reminiscing about 2025 and a little bit of looking forward to 2026. Then we're going to take a couple weeks off before we get at it, because, once 2026 gets here, we're going to be busy all the time. It's going to be a marathon and a sprint. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep running because the campaign season starts, people start paying attention, and before we know it, it'll be November. So with that, are we ready to get started?
Mm-hmm. Let's do it.
All right. So the story that I'm going to talk about tonight is the General Assembly session that occurred yesterday. There was a special session of the General Assembly. This is something that happens when the General Assembly needs to do work outside of its 90-day regular session that usually runs from January to April. So there was a special session that popped up yesterday, and they really took on two major things during this. First, the House elected a new speaker. Jocelyn Pena-Melnick is a progressive, a well-respected delegate from Prince George's County, and the first Latina to hold the position of speaker. That was the main reason, functionally, that they had to get together and hold the special session. But they also used the special session for the General Assembly to overturn more than a dozen of Governor Moore's vetoes from May. In Maryland, if the governor vetoes a bill and 3/5 of each house of the General Assembly, or each chamber of the General Assembly, decide to overturn that veto, the bill still goes into law. And last May, Wes Moore made a big public show of vetoing a lot of bills, and then he spent the spring, summer, and fall talking about it on television and starting a war with the General Assembly over those vetoes. Bills on reparations, data centers, climate studies, a whole bunch of things at the core of a green and progressive agenda were vetoed. All of these were high-profile vetoes, and all of them were overturned during the special session yesterday. And in Maryland, where Democrats have this decade-long veto-proof majority in both chambers of the state legislature, days like yesterday, where the General Assembly has a celebration about overriding the governor's vetoes, those kind of days are usually reserved for when a Republican governor is in office, like Larry Hogan and Bob Ehrlich. There was over a dozen vetoes yesterday, and during Martin O'Malley's entire term from 2007 to 2014, it was 8 years. There was only a few substantive overrides, like 1, 2, maybe 3 veto overrides during that whole 8 years. When Paris Glendening was the governor of Maryland before him, it was like 8 years, and I couldn't find any overrides. Maybe there was a couple here and there. So when Democratic governors are in charge, the Democratic General Assembly typically, like defers to their vetoes. And the question is why? I think some of it is party loyalty, some of it is fear of retaliation, a sort of don't come for the if you come for the king, you better not miss type of thing. And some of it is there has typically been teamwork between governors and the governor's mansion and and the people in the General Assembly. But Moore seems to have none of those things. He doesn't seem to have party loyalty. There doesn't seem to be a fear of his retaliation. And the lack of teamwork between him and the General Assembly has had tons of articles written about it this summer, and it's really quite troubling to a lot of people. So yesterday, how did that work out? Wes Moore got more than a dozen of his high-profile veto overrides from May overridden in one day from his own party. That's not business as usual. That's a strong rebuke. It's a sign of things to come, and it's a sign that conflict between the governor and the General Assembly is only going to get worse when the legislative session starts in 3 weeks. Now, I want to focus on one of those overrides, and it's a bill that I've spent the most of my time on this year. SB 587, the Maryland Reparations Commission, is a bill that establishes a statewide reparations commission to study and make recommendations relating to appropriate benefits to be made to individuals whose ancestors were enslaved in the state or impacted by certain inequitable government policies. The Legislative Black Caucus, the largest Black caucus in any legislature in the country, made this their priority bill in the 2025 legislative session. And according to the bill, the commission is charged with answering questions like which state laws and policy are subject to reparations, who should be eligible, and how those reparations should be paid. The commission is responsible for making preliminary recommendations to the governor and the General Assembly by January of 2027, right after the new governor is inaugurated, and the final recommendations come out in November of 2027 so that the 2028 General Assembly can be about reparations. Now, Moore vetoed this bill, SB 587, in May. His reason at the time was that he didn't want more study. He wanted action. And that sounds good, right? We want action over study. We know the reparations are due. We don't need to study it anymore. Let's get things done. Here's the problem with that. There is no executive action that Moore has taken that is on par with the recommendations the commission is likely to make. He can take any action that he could have taken during that time could have also occurred while the commission was doing its work to figure out a comprehensive reparations policy. And perhaps more importantly, as was pointed out by my delegate, Kaylin Young, here from Northeast Baltimore, many of the things that might be done by executive order are unlikely to stand up to federal courts without first doing the rigorous study on implementation needed to craft and pass legislation that would allow strict scrutiny to be passed for reparations policy. So, 7 months after Moore's high-profile veto of this bill, where are we? Moore's traveled the country and the TV and podcast circuit spreading a billionaire's abundance agenda that includes deregulation of energy and housing so that we can build luxury condos, natural gas plants, and data centers. He's focused on austerity budgeting and cuts to public services. He's led opposition to unions, especially public sector unions, and he's emphasized executive action over legislative process. All of this is the billionaire's abundance agenda, and he has used the Reparations Commission as a punching bag for what he thinks is wrong about the people who currently have power in his party: unions, Black folks, immigrants, working people. He does not think that they should have the power that they have, and he's used the Reparations Commission to make that point. Yesterday, the General Assembly overrode him and put the commission into law. Everybody knew this was going to happen. including many of Moore's supporters and frankly many of his staff. It was clear since May that the General Assembly was going to override this veto. So 7 months later, the commission is law, but they've been delayed by 7 months to do the good study necessary to craft real reparations policy. And here's the thing. The deadlines don't move forward by 7 months to account for Moore's political stunt and his veto. This is sabotage on Moore's part. Watch for him to continue to slow roll appointments, shrink the commission's timeline even further, and then blame the commission if the final product feels rushed. That's the pattern. I'm angry about it, it's unnecessary, and it's a real opportunity cost of the political show that he has put on. But now, that's the past, and the question is, where do we go from here? Based on the 2027 timeline that is in the bill, this will be a major policy focus for the General Assembly and the next governor in 2027. So in our campaign, we will move forward with bold demands, not relying on business as usual politics. That means organizing, building power outside the two-party system, and using electoral politics to raise the stakes on the questions of reparative justice. Reparative justice that reckons with Maryland's history must be a central issue in the 2026 election, and our campaign will make sure that it is. The Green Party of the United States has had reparations in our platform for over 2 decades. The specifics have changed a lot over that time as our members have done the rigorous study, the policy development, and the practical work of serving on government commissions in many localities across the country. We've learned a few things about reparations policy in that time. 1, we don't need to study whether they are due. We need to study what to do. The philosophical question is answered. There is no question there. Reparations are due. The implementation question is open, and figuring out implementation that allows for durable policy and legal framework is where we need to put the focus for our government, academic, and intellectual resources. 2, there's no one-size-fits-all reparations solution, and debates between one approach and the other are often more ideological than practical. They are still engaged in the philosophical conversation and the ideological conversation. They are not engaged in the implementation conversation, and that's where we need to move. What we need is a multifaceted approach that identifies the kind of damage that was done and the right repair within the local context in which the law is being made. 3, reparations cannot simply be a wealth redistribution. They must fundamentally realign the power structures that have come from white supremacy. If they don't do this, they will fail. 4, the two-party system is designed to make this kind of justice impossible, and until we get beyond that system, the possibility of reparative justice will always be limited by powerful Democrats like Wes Moore, who would rather take the moment of political opportunity than do the hard work of repair. Those 4 things. So with those 4 things in mind, our campaign will spend 2026 observing the work of the commission and supporting it while putting forward our recommendations about a real and comprehensive reparations policy should be in Maryland. Our work, like that of the commission, is drawn from Black study, the rigorous history, policy, and analysis that must be at the center of any real racial justice. Our campaign policy is also based on the embodied experience of Black people on the front lines of contemporary struggle for racial justice in Maryland. It's a work in process, and we look forward to continue working with people who we've been working with and to reaching out to new people who we can include in this conversation, because we think it is essential to develop this policy collaboratively and collectively as we go forward. Our webpage, gogreen2026.com reparations, outlines our policy platform. In early 2026, Owen and I will do a deep dive video about this where we go into detail on each of these policies because we think this is an important part of the debates in the 2026 election. I want to be clear. It's not important because of what happened in 2025. The bill is passed. The veto is overridden. We can talk about that more, but what we really need to talk about is what happens in 2027, 2028, and beyond when the commission makes its recommendations and we move forward with the policy. Maryland has the opportunity to lead the nation on reparations, but only if Marylanders know the truth about the policy and have a governor with the courage to work with the General Assembly to make real, just, and durable policy. So stay tuned. This will be a topic we talk a lot about in 26, and we hope you will participate in that conversation.
Yeah, this is such an important conversation, Andy. I know you've really been focused on it and listening to a lot of different folks who have done work on this for a long time, and there are so many different voices in that conversation. And I heard some of them. It was interesting as I was driving home today, and I was listening to a call-in radio show. Folks were calling in, and there was this interesting moment where someone called in and said, well, didn't the governor say he's against reparations? And the host, who's usually pretty off the cuff, read what sounded kind of like a statement from the governor about how he's not against it, not against reparations. So I think there's this really interesting thing happening in the media and in certain conversations about kind of more trying to have it both ways. And I think podcasts like this and other folks like LBS, who showed their messaging on this, is really important to hold them accountable for the veto.
Yeah. And, look, so I think he's already shown us that when the recommendations come to us, he's not likely to work with the General Assembly. There's two things that characterize his response to this. One is his insistence that we don't need to study this question anymore, and that all we need to do is to act. He points to plenty of studies that talk about whether reparations are due. We agree with him about that. We don't need to find out anymore whether reparations are due. We know they are. We know they are in Maryland. Maryland was a state that was a union state, but had 87,000 people enslaved at the turn of the Civil War. Those people stayed enslaved after the Emancipation Proclamation because, again, we were not a Southern state, so the Emancipation Proclamation didn't apply to us. We had all sorts of things after 1864 that continued racial injustice. There was segregation. There was redlining that came out of Maryland. There was a lot that Maryland has to do in order to make repair. And so we don't need to study anymore whether they're due, but we do need to study what to do. And I think that's a really important part of the response there, is that he grouped those two things together in order to say that what we need to do has already been answered by the studies that say whether they're due, and it has not. The second thing is that he took a very personal approach to this and said that many of his ideas and policies are already doing reparations. And many of his ideas and policies are doing sort of race-based repair, race-based funding and things like that. But with bills or with programs like the Enough Act, where he's directing some of this money into communities, he's doing, I sort of call it the Just Enough Act, right? So that he can make a play at doing some of these things while still mostly creating policies that work for the wealthy and things like that. So there's two aspects to his approach to it. One is we don't need to study. And the second is nobody needs to tell me how to do reparations. And I think both of those things betray a sort of anti-intellectualism that is really disappointing when we see that the ultimate price of his delay and his veto was taking 7 months away from Black scholars, historians, and policymakers who were willing to volunteer for the state in order to put together this policy.
And there was sort of a few days before the special session, there was this concession to kind of the big lowercase g green, big green movement on a commission studying climate, right? And it was almost like using that as a bargaining chip to try to delay the inevitable overturning of his veto on the reparations commission study, right?
Yeah, and I mean, he got overridden on climate bills. He got overridden on stuff that would just study data centers. So he took this approach that was like, we don't need to study these things. And it's like, he doesn't need to study data centers because he's in their pocket and he knows exactly what their plans are. He doesn't need anybody to tell him what their plans are because they've told him what their plans are. But like the climate study was, again, he funded it, I think, in an attempt to get them to not override the veto on it because he didn't want to get embarrassed. And he just got embarrassed yesterday. They smacked him around and in unison told him that no matter what he does with his slate that he's trying to use to stop people from challenging him or whatever, that they're going to stand up to him. I think it's setting up a really interesting General Assembly session where there's going to be a war between a General Assembly that's largely elected by working class Black folks, working class Latin folks, by unions, by advocacy organizations, and by Democratic Party clubs, and a governor who wants to get elected to president because he supports billionaires, corporations, and big foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation. I think that's a conflict that we're going to see playing out for the rest of the General Assembly, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that spreading to other states as well, as billionaire governors pursue their presidential aspirations and tap into a billionaire's abundance agenda, while elected Democrats in these places are more than likely pursuing a workers and environmental agenda.
Right. And when you were laying out the historical examples with O'Malley and Glendenning, one thing I thought that was interesting there is O'Malley, of course, also had presidential ambitions, but the way he sort of padded his resume and built his case to be able to run for president in 2016 was in part to pass liberal legislation in partnership with the General Assembly. And that seems much less the pathway that Governor Moore is taking to his Democratic primary presidential bid. Potentially, he's saying he's not interested, but it seems like he's going more for the executive strength and autonomous or individual action, which really it's disturbing because that is Trump's way of operating. And it's almost a concession that, legislatures don't count in governance anymore in the post-Trump era.
I mean, he's very explicit about it. He has said, he went right after the reparations veto, he went to North Carolina and he said, he went to South Carolina and he said, we've got to stop being the party of no and slow and start moving fast like President Trump does. Like, a very explicit part of this abundance agenda is that executives should move fast, legislatures are a drag, regulation is a drag, and we got to, and we talked about this as it relates to the data center, where he says he wants to be able to quickly put new gas plants online. So all of this is the billionaire's abundance agenda, and he's the avatar of it at the national level right now.
Yeah, Dana has a couple good questions in the chat, and because you mentioned the term abundance a few times, I think in 2026, we should have a show sort of on this. This is referring to Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein's book. And I have a friend who bought me this book and I'm reading it. I'm going to read it over my winter break. And because he said, you need to read it before you critique it. And there's some interesting things in there that there are some critiques of the two-party system in there.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think we should have a whole show and kind of unpack what is the mainstreamed corporate Democrat friendly version of abundance, and are there some things in that argument that we can also explore and ideate around too? And because I think it's more the kind of made for TV version of abundance is not totally exactly what I'm finding in the book.
Yeah, so I mean, I read the book and I've read a lot of their follow-on stuff on it, and I absolutely think this is a show that we should do, because I think more, there's a show called Radio Abundance. It's a podcast that is about abundance, and the first episode was with Wes Moore, right? So he is aligning himself with Ezra Klein and with Derek Thompson, and they keep referencing him in nice ways. And I think that we're going to be able to use that as an effective frame to understand his approach to these things as we talk about his deregulation, as we talk about his sneering at expertise, as we talk about his fight against public sector unions, and as we talk about his austerity. I think it will be important to construct what this stuff is and how those parts of what he's doing are an avatar of it, and to recognize that, yes, we want stuff. People want stuff. We deserve things. Marylanders work hard. And they deserve stuff. And so if we're building the Maryland we deserve, we should embrace some parts of abundance. But I think that the agenda is largely an agenda that serves billionaires, even if the policy critiques are useful and worthwhile. So we let's do that show in 2026. That's a lot that we just talked about. And I see Christy is getting ready to come on her spot. So I want to do your segment and then get to Christy for the interview for tonight. So you ready for me to switch it over?
Yeah, and I think we'll add Dana's questions to the question section for the next show in January.
Yeah.
So one thing I took note of as Andy, you were doing your segment, was in our platform. One of the components is of our reparations policies, making anchor institutions pay their fair share. And this is a different context, but I will be talking about the biggest anchor institution in Baltimore, one of the very biggest in the state, and that's Johns Hopkins University, and how they're not standing up for their students, they're not standing up for their workers, and how that fits, how this one specific case of a specific Johns Hopkins graduate worker fits into the larger problem that education, both K-12 and higher education in Maryland and around the country, is facing in light of the onslaught against immigrants and international students that is largely propelled by the Trump administration, but is a symptom of the two-party system, because we haven't had the comprehensive immigration reform that would have protected immigrants. So tonight, as I was driving home, I stopped at this protest. It was organized by TRUE, which is the Graduate Workers Union at Johns Hopkins University. And just kind of as an aside, I've learned so much from watching the way that they organize. One of our campaign team members, Andrew Anim, is an organizer and a member. And so as I was working to organize my own workplace, my own college, I was looking at what they were doing. I was learning from them. I went to their hot labor school this summer, which was a series of Zoom seminars on really interesting topics. And so they're doing really important work to mobilize worker power at the largest employer and the largest anchor institution in the largest city in our state. And so I've been receiving their communications, and I signed a petition as someone who really cares about immigrant education as my day job. I signed a petition about the case of Ehsan Rajabi, who's a Iranian international student and graduate worker at Johns Hopkins, who, because of the really tyrannical and hateful crackdown on immigrants and international students by the Trump administration, is currently stuck in Canada. And we'll include that petition link when we publish this later. But it's a terrible situation, and you would expect that because international students, because grad workers bring so much value to research universities. I mean, it's really hard to imagine research universities in the United States working at the level they do without the international talent that they bring in from around the world. The labor of these folks makes our research universities the best in the world, and Hopkins is certainly an example of that. And so you would think that the university, given its massive fiscal resources, given its widespread political connections and institutional power, would back up one of their own who was stranded in Canada, through no fault of his own, and instead they've turned around and denied him stipend and shot down proposals that he do a temporary student exchange with a Canadian university. There seems to be two that might be interested in that, and with these really kind of mealy-mouthed responses from their lawyers, which take weeks or months to respond to him. So really the protest today was about demanding that Hopkins provide the resources that Ehsan needs in order to sustain himself and his family, and to bring him back to Baltimore, where he can continue doing the important work. So if you're watching this later, check the description. We'll have the petition for you to sign, and you can stay involved in this. But I think that this specific example is part of a larger dynamic that we're seeing in Maryland, which speaks to the importance of immigrants, not only for the culture and economy of our state, but also for the education in our state. And so this headline in the Baltimore Banner, in an article by Talia Richmond, is accurate, but unfortunate. So there are a lot of leaders of K-12 school systems, of Maryland schools, who are scratching their heads, who are surprised and confused that their enrollment after years of growth and in the face of projected growth for years to come has actually shrunk this year by about 1,500 students. And that's because of the anti-immigrant, xenophobic, hateful deportation machine that the Trump administration has ramped up, and also because of the failure of Maryland's congressional Democrats and Congress as a whole to do their job and pass immigration reform. It's also because of the failure of state Democrats to pass immigration protections, banning collaboration with ICE, for example, and making Maryland an even better place for immigrants to come. So one of the examples from the article is, last year in Maryland's biggest school district, Montgomery County, there were hundreds of newcomer students, and newcomer students are immigrant students or the children of immigrants who arrive often not during the summer or first day of school, but throughout the school year. And there were about I think about 400 of them in Montgomery County, and this year it's been far fewer. And so this is happening all across the state. The numbers might be smaller in some of the smaller school districts, and it's contributing to enrollment shrinking. And enrollment, of course, is tied to funding. And so we're already heading into a really difficult budget climate in the upcoming General Assembly session. There's talk of austerity, there's talk of massive budget cuts, and this only makes things worse. And so there's a lot that we'll be rolling out our education platform in the coming weeks. Check back for that on our website under the priorities tab. But really, this should surprise absolutely no one. And there should have been advocacy in place to hold these school districts harmless for the potential loss of students, because there's still a lot of unmet needs that were already there. And instead, we're kind of scrambling and in response mode. So I think, these are, it'll be, the big picture here, I think, is that what's good for immigrants is good for all students. And when immigrants are under attack, it affects all students and all of our members of our school community. And this is a really good example of that. Because of the falling number of immigrant students, all school districts in the state of Maryland are facing even worse budget cuts. And so that speaks to the importance of immigrant solidarity and the importance of strengthening our public schools, fully funding the blueprint, which is going to be part of our education platform.
Yeah, thank you, Owen. This is a really good pairing of stories, because I think your point that this is not happening to somebody else. This is something that is happening to our communities, our public school communities, our communities where we live. And I think it's really important to know that last year, the Democrats in the Maryland General Assembly had an opportunity to do something about this. They had a set of bills that were put in front of them that would have restricted cooperation with ICE, made certain public spaces safe zones and things like that. And those things would have immigrant rights organizations understood that those things would have directly addressed this type of problem, as well as make people feel more safe and secure in our communities. And, in a sort of the most weaselly act of last year's General Assembly in some ways, Senate President Bill Ferguson killed a lot of those things in a literal backroom deal at the literal last minute possible in April in Annapolis. And now this year he's suddenly talking about, now is the time to act to protect immigrants and things like that. Last year or the year before that or the year before that was the time to act to protect immigrants. And now it is not a preventative, it is now a responsive type of thing. And they just lacked the courage. Bill Ferguson, I'll say this very plainly, Bill Ferguson lacked the courage to do do something right last year as it related to immigration. And he followed polling numbers that said that Trump's immigration policies were going to be popular before they ever got implemented. And so he undermined all the work that advocates were doing, and he made literal backroom deals at the literal last minute because he was worried about polling numbers. Well, by the time the General Assembly was done, those polling numbers had flipped around, and the people that he sold out in order to appeal to those polling numbers were being detained, being deported, and this became a political liability for him. So this year, suddenly they're talking about solving the problem, when last year they had a perfectly good set of opportunities to solve the problem, and they didn't do it. So, I think this is another one of those examples of, if Democrats in Maryland could use their decades-long veto-proof majority and their control of every major seat of power in the state to work for the people they say they're working for, immigrants, workers, students, teachers, all of those folks, then we wouldn't be in this situation. But they don't do that because they lack the courage, and they lack the courage to stand up for people unless it's politically convenient for them. And you see where it gets us.
Yeah, they wait until the Republicans do something so depraved and so inhumane that they feel like they have the political space to make a reform. But in doing that, it shifts the whole conversation far to the right and far in an anti-immigrant position. Whereas if they had taken a strong stand to begin with, it would have prevented that erosion of immigrants' rights. And I think that's speaks to the importance of having a multi-party system. In a two-party system, the center-left party is going to move to the right when the right-wing party moves to the far right. But in a multi-party system where Democrats have to worry about losing voters on their left flank as well as their center flank, it changes the calculus. And so even having a couple of Greens in the General Assembly might have changed that outcome, and having a strong, robust Green Party run for governor this coming year in 2026 could change outcomes as it relates to policy in Maryland.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for doing this story, Owen. We'll keep an eye on it. I want to go ahead and bring on Christy Frink. Christy is a campaign team member, investigative researcher, and a person of many interests and talents that we will dive into a little bit today. But Christy, thank you for coming on.
Was unprepared for that, but thank you.
Yes, we're always going to try to use that button at least once during every show. You might get it again if there's an answer that we really like.
Nice.
So why don't we get into it, Owen? Why don't you get us started?
Yeah, I will. I just want to say up front, though, that, Christy, you're one of the reasons why I decided to join Andy on the ticket, right? Andy's been my friend for 9-10 years or whatever. That's cool. But there was this moment where you use some of the skills that we're going to be talking about to look into a money trail related to a proposed stadium in Frederick that the Lieutenant Governor Miller was supporting. And that's one of the things that really got me excited about being part of this team, because there was that really intense focus on research and following the money and, holding folks accountable and working with local organizers. And we did all that in that case. And we're going to continue doing that. But so thank you for, helping me see that the water was warm and that I should jump into this campaign.
Awesome. I didn't know that.
Awesome. Yeah. So to, put that, that's why one of the reasons why I got involved. But what made you just decide to join this campaign? And, what kind of brought you away from mainstream politics and towards our Green campaign?
Yeah. So I've had kind of an interesting journey over the last few years, I feel like. I moved to Baltimore back in 2019 and took a lot of time trying to get plugged into the community. And a lot of that was through neighborhood stuff. And through that, I met Andy. I guess we got probably connected before the pandemic at some point. So that all happened. And then kind of coming out of that, we got involved with the Baltimore for Democracy campaign. So this was back last election year. There was a ballot measure in Baltimore City that was aimed at cutting the city council in half, and it was backed by David Smith of Sinclair. And we kind of came together and it was like, all right, well, what do we do? Can we, like, he has a ballot issue committee. Can we make a ballot issue committee? And so we did. And I think it was a way to just get absolutely thrown into kind of the chaos of Baltimore politics, I feel like. And, I know I spent 15 years in Nashville. I knew that scene very well, did not know much about what was going on here. And so it felt very much like trial by fire, and it was kind of like we got into it and it just like took off. And it was a few of us just working really, really hard around the clock for about 6 months, trying to do what we could. And like, we're all people with full-time jobs. We were all kind of trying to pull together different groups of folks. And I think through that, I was so impressed seeing Andy's work up close and seeing, in particular, the coalition building, I think. And so it was, here's this issue. We're in a largely blue city. We have mostly Democrats here. And we also, like, we were able to venture outside of that, I think, mostly because of Andy's leadership and relationships and everything that he's kind of built up over time here. And it was kind of my first time up close seeing this idea that, like, you had a number of people from different third parties who could come together and say, we don't agree on everything, but we agree on this one thing. So, like, let's put our heads together. Let's figure out what we can do here. And, like, after, years of just being very disillusioned, I think, with the two-party system, it was just like a light bulb went off. It was like, oh, like, this is how it's supposed to work. Like, we should be able to find some common ground somewhere and be able to, like, work on those things together and then make each other better. I don't know. It was like, we can split off later and run against each other later, but right now we've got this really important thing that we need to work on. So let's do that. And I think it was such a, like, eye-opening thing to experience that. And we ultimately won in that situation, which was crazy. I think we all, like, went into even election day having zero idea of, like, where this thing was going. Baltimore City has only ever voted down, one other ballot measure in, like, the last, 20, 25 years. Mm-hmm. And so, like, we felt like the odds were, like, very against us. Obviously, there were lots of other folks working on this stuff in the city too, but it was like, I just remember coming out, like, reading the headline at the end of the day and just being like, oh my gosh, like, we just did this. It's crazy. So yeah, when Andy, came to me with an opportunity to join the campaign team, it was like, yeah, I mean, I've never worked on a political campaign. I am new to the third party world, but, like, I want to learn and I want to be here for it. And I think having to take in new information and change my opinion over time is something that I've had to do my whole life. Like, I grew up in a very conservative household. The more I've learned about the world, the more I've kind of migrated in a certain direction. And so I feel like I deeply enjoy kind of getting into these situations where I have to, like, look at something that, like, maybe I thought was, like, not for me before, but, like, let's, I'm seeing something different. I'm taking in new information. Like, let me see what this is about. So, yeah, so I've kind of, like, I've plugged in here. I've been, I had worked on a lot of the graphics kind of early on in the campaign, and now kind of shifting more into the research side, which is just me being interested in that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, congratulations and great job with the organizing to beat that ballot initiative. It just doesn't happen, right? So I think it's hard to stress too much how unprecedented, how unusual that is. So it's great to get a win, one of your first organizing campaigns in town. So that's awesome. The second thing that I just want to highlight before I hand it over to Andy is, you said never worked on an electoral campaign before, and Seth, who we had on last time, said something kind of similar. And I think that this is a sign of how we're doing politics differently, because usually when people run for political office, they try to get the folks around them who have done this before. They get fundraisers who know how to bundle. They get, corporate, ad firms to cut their ads, and they start, because of their process being so similar, their outcomes end up being similar. So they do politics the same way, and they end up producing the same outcomes. And so I think that's very different. Obviously, we value folks who have campaign experience, but we value folks who have skills which are adjacent to and relevant to, and often, really, really applicable to the electoral work. And I think the work that you're doing with us proves that.
It totally, and I think we should do a whole episode about like the story of Baltimore for democracy, because it really is one of these things where a couple of us, myself and Davon Love and a few other folks who have done the like won when we're not supposed to win type of thing in the past, got together and said, we got to beat this thing that David Smith is doing that's going to cut our representation in half. And when we started, everybody was like, yeah, you're not going to beat it. Like, it's nice that you're doing it and I appreciate the work, but like these things always pass. This is Baltimore. This is how it works, right? And then as we started going and it started gaining momentum and unions started joining and faith organizations started joining and other coalitions started forming and Democratic elected started joining, pretty soon the coolest thing you could be doing in Baltimore was to be arguing against Question H. And it was like the only thing that was exciting on a terrible election night for a lot of people. And I remember we were at a party on election night and it was like, it's so nice on an election where fascism was ascendant, to see a victory against one of the fascist media enablers. And so it was a good win. And I think it proved that when people get together, they can do things that we're not supposed to be able to do. We should definitely do a whole show about it and get into the details and bring some other folks on. But I want to talk about some of the skills that you're bringing to the campaign and some of the role that you're shifting into right now. You filed a Maryland Public Information Act request about the Anthropic deal that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where Governor Moore, Anthropic, the Rockefeller Foundation, and a whole bunch of other folks gave Claude a government job. So can you first give us an overview of what an MPIA request is, and then let us know what you were looking for with this one and all of that?
Yeah, sure. And I'll back up a little bit too, and just we were starting to look into this deal. I think you were the one who had brought it up, seeing the announcement back in, I think, mid-November, and it just kind of raised an eyebrow. And this is always how these things start for me. It just raises an eyebrow and I get curious and I get nosy, and then I'm like, okay, I got to figure out what's going on here. And so, there is, over the last, I don't know, probably 10 years, I feel like I've gotten very comfortable navigating the publicly searchable data. There are things that are out there that are very easy to pull up in a web browser and look at. You've got campaign finance data, you've got Open Data Maryland that has contract and procurement and environmental data and all sorts of stuff. There's the FEC if you want to venture outside of state campaign finance stuff. And you can cobble together a lot of information with that stuff, but it will only get you so far, I think. And what we've found here is that we dug through that stuff as much as we could, and we recognized that, wait a second, here's this big deal. There is no contract in the state database. What's that about? It's like we're talking about Anthropic, one of the huge players in the LLM space, making a huge deal with the state of Maryland. Where is the paper trail on that? And so it turns out that, publicly searchable data is not the end of the road. There's plenty of public data outside of that goes well beyond what you can kind of come up with yourself. But you have to go through the MPIA process in order to get to that. And this is my first time trying it. So it's honestly, I've had A lot of my friends over the years have been kind of into similar stuff, and I've seen them go through the process with FOIA requests and things like that. And I know it can be pretty arduous, but it was like, I don't know, I kind of kept hitting dead ends, and it was like, the next step is to file MPIA. And originally it was kind of like, oh, well, I've hit a wall, I can't do that. And then it was like, wait a second, like I could, like, I could file. And what MPIA does is it's essentially state-specific FOIA. So it's like Maryland has their own kind of basically law saying that you can query a government agency and say, I want to see these documents, and they have to provide them on some level. So obviously that's subject to things like redactions or withholding, or things that they decide to give you versus not. But by and large, like, that is the expectation, that if I want all of the paperwork regarding this deal, that they should be able to produce that for me. And I think such a crazy part of that is like that a lot of people don't realize is like anyone can file an MPIA request for any reason at any time, or for no reason at all. Like, you don't need to be a reporter. You don't need to be working on a campaign. Like, if you are curious and you are nosy like me, you can just do it. And it varies by agency. So for the governor's office, we had to go through a portal. They have like a thing you have to sign up for and go put in a request. Some of the agencies just have email addresses, and you just email their PIA contact. But there are stipulations, like they have to get back to you in 10 days, and they have to provide the information within 30 days. And there's like a whole, set of regulations around that stuff. And so, we basically put together, a bunch of MPIA requests for the governor's office, the Department of Labor, the Department of General Services, the Department of IT, and then I think the Board of Public Works. And we're just hoping, well, we can hopefully get at something between all of these different requests. And it's been interesting, I'll say. Like, I think we finally got our first batch of, I will say the Board of Public Works was quick to get back, but didn't have a lot of information. But the governor's office finally got back to me this morning and provided a couple of documents. I think not what we were hoping exactly, but
in time for the podcast, at least,
I know. I was like, I had like 10 minutes before the show to start going through it. But I don't know, it's like fascinating to me. So I ended up getting the memo of understanding between the state and Anthropic, and then Percepto, which is the other company that they're contracting to help with the implementation, a data use agreement with Percepta, and then an NDA, I think. And there might have been one other thing, but between all those things, starting to like feel out the scope of work, who was paying for what. I think the big thing that it confirmed for us is that Rockefeller Foundation is paying for it. And that opens up a whole host of other questions, right? Like, I think, and this is the thing about like public data research that I think has also probably played into me migrating in this direction politically, is like, I don't know. It's like you might start out with campaign finance and you can look up, Westmore's donations, but probably Amazon is not maxing out their $6,000 donation with Westmore and calling it a day. Like, there are like other things, there are other vehicles, there are PACs, there are super PACs, there are procurement deals, there is lobbying, there's all kinds of stuff that kind of goes into that picture. But here in this case, we have, again, huge agreement between the state of Maryland, big press release, a lot of fanfare. We've got Anthropic involved. We've got Percepta involved, which is founded by an ex-Palantir exec and is actually currently being sued by Palantir. So that's an interesting twist. And we have basically no information on how much that's costing. Like, we have no idea. Like, because they normally, if they went through a state procurement process, there's a paper trail of procurement, there are RFPs that go out, there's legal justification, there's contract information. But because Rockefeller was able to broker it, they got around all that. So it's like basically Rockefeller is the one paying all of those entities, which means that none of those things show up anywhere in the public system, and they get to bypass a lot of the procurement stuff that they would normally have to go through. So I think there are so many loopholes and so many black holes of information that people at that level are very used to navigating and kind of coming in and out of. And like that in itself is an interesting thing to see. And I think once you get up to that level of money and influence and power and stuff too, it becomes very obvious that party affiliation does not matter to these people. Like if a company is making donations, like they might make $100,000 donation to each candidate from each party because they want that influence when that person gets into office. So there's no, we're down here kind of fighting about all these things that like affect our lives and, are deeply important to us. And it seems like barely any of that is driving what's going on up at those kind of levels of government. And I think, this is one of those cases.
I think, we had originally, when we thought that the state was going to meet its own deadlines, we had originally put this question in our sort of questions that we were going to ask you. That was like, what did you find and not find? And I think you started to touch on it a little bit, and we'll get back to it later when we have a chance to go in more into the documents and get more documents out. But, I think it is like we were talking before the show. And I was like, well, I was hoping that there'd be a file that was called like smoking gun _ do not share _ copy _1, or something that would tell us that like there was in fact some grand scheme to do some corruption here. But what I think it shows is the way that these wealthy players interact without illegality, but still do shady stuff and still do things that are like this foundation that is using money from these companies is investing in government so that governments can do this without having to go through the regular channels and things like that. Like that's shady stuff that needs to have light shined on it. And I think, it reminds me that one of the things that Ralph Nader did well before he ever ran for president was this stuff. He made sure that citizens had the ability to demand transparency from governments and industry started to understand that that's what was happening in these cases. And so they made it much harder and they made the process. They were like, oh, no, we can't let the people have access to what's actually happening. And we can't let them slow stuff down with their comments and questions about the things that we want to do. So government and industry took that win by Ralph Nader and worked really hard to make it more difficult. And I really appreciate that you're doing the work to dig into it, even though we're 40 years into the hyper difficult version of this, and the beautiful vision of what it could have been has been eroded into this, thing that is mostly done. I mean, you're doing work that is mostly done by reporters, people with public interest groups, and law firms and lobbyists. So like doing it as a person on your free time is really impressive given the way the system is designed.
Yeah, it's wild. And I think, one of the things that I think is, a problem right now is that we don't have media arms looking into this stuff. Like I don't know, I think that's kind of a symptom of our time and the overwhelm of the media cycle and the gutting of, any kind of good journalism. But I don't know. It's like the coverage of this deal, every single outlet like reprinted the press release. That's all they did. There was no like, I wonder how much this cost. I wonder if taxpayers are paying for this. Like just like basic stuff, and like
I wonder if the Rockefeller Foundation is using money from a fund that didn't exist a couple of years ago to pay a company that didn't exist a couple of years ago.
To pay a company that formed in October for a deal in November that's like made up of Palantir execs that are getting sued by Palantir right now. Like it's just like everything about it is so like, I don't know. It's like I could rattle off 30 red flags just from looking at the press release, And so I think there's just, it's like, I'm glad that we have these avenues. I also wish that the people who had the tools who were getting paid to do this stuff would do it better. And so like in lieu of that, I think that is where it's helpful to know that as a citizen, I can step up and look at that stuff. And like, maybe I don't have an attorney's eyes to look through, and maybe I don't have abundance of free time to do this stuff. But you know, if I have the itch, the tools are there. And I think part of this particular thing was just doing it for the first time. So I learned how to do it. Like, I learned how to navigate it. I know, you know, what types of responses to expect and how to get to each agency and stuff. So I'm hopeful that this is the first round of many. I feel like the state government's going to hate to see me come in.
Yeah.
So.
Well, so I mean, as you're starting to learn what to expect and what the parameters are, what's your sense of what works well with Maryland's transparency laws and what seems to be off or not working well?
I mean, I think I didn't have trouble finding out how to submit the request. So there's that. I think, you know, each of the agency websites was fairly clear on how to do that. They've also been responsive. Like, I'll say that about these, you know, I think these are public servants who largely, you know, want to get the information into your hands and want to get that stuff out to Marylanders. But I think what is challenging is it's still very opaque. And this is where we are in the process, where we've gotten, you know, our first kind of dump of documents. It's a little underwhelming. I suspect there's some stuff that might be missing, which probably could be because I said I wrote the wrong word in an email and they're sticking to, you know, the letter of whatever I asked for. And now I get to figure out, what do I do from here, right? Like, do I email them back? Do I go through an ombudsman? Do I appeal through, you know, OIG office? Like, it's like, I think that part of it then becomes kind of murky. So in this like greenfield path of like, I put in an MPIA request, they give me exactly what I want, like, that's functioning great. But I think there's still a big power imbalance between the person asking for the information and the people providing it. And I get the sense that if you don't say the magic words, like you'll be limited in what you get. So I think that to me is the part that.
Yeah, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, and only the state government knows whether there are actually needles there, and like knows what they look like.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's like, if they're like, well, we don't call this a needle, we call this a pointy thing with a small metal pointy thing, and you need to call it small metal pointy thing if you want us to tell you it exists, right? Like, yeah. I think that aspect of it, where it is like, you have to have an eye for what the issue is in order to know what it is you're looking for. And if you use a word that works in one industry but doesn't work in another industry to ask for that thing, they're gonna be like, hey, yeah, sorry, we don't have a playbook, we have a book play. Yeah. You know, and you know, they're not. It is like, they are there to fulfill very targeted requests. They're not there to fulfill, like, can you tell me everything you have about a thing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And I think especially when you're getting into something like this, like, I would imagine, you know, the governor's office missed their own deadline 3 times in this case. So like, they were going to get back to me on X date. They emailed me the following Monday and said, we need another week. And then, you know, at the end of that week, I still didn't have anything. Followed up the next week. They were like, oh yeah, we'll get it tomorrow. And then they missed that too. So it's like, I also suspect with this deal in particular, there's like a fair amount of like circling of the wagons to see what we want to give up and what we don't. And so maybe in some cases it's not quite this sensitive, and so it's a little bit easier of a process. But yeah, like I think probably the hurdle that a lot of citizens have to get over is like knowing exactly what to ask for, and that's hard, I think. And I mean, even trying to triangulate, like Andy and I were talking before the call, there's part of the executive order that Westmore issued back in January 2024, like mandated an AI procurement playbook. So it was under the responsibility of the Department of General Services, was supposed to deliver this in a certain time frame. I put in a PIA request for the AI procurement playbook and I even cited the part of the executive order that required it. And they came back and they were like, we don't have anything. It's like, well,
You know,
do you not have anything because you didn't make it, which would be weird, but also like, maybe I'm not calling it the right things. Maybe you've changed it to something else in the last year. I don't know. So I feel like that's kind of the game that we're going to get into with this one.
I think there's this interesting thing when people say government should run like a business. And it is like government is running just fine like a business right now. Because if you've been in a business that has had an executive level AI rollout, or if you've been in an institution that has an executive level AI rollout, there's a lot of big plans for what's going to get done. And there's a lot of artifacts and documents that they say have to be produced. And then the operations people are not actually really producing those things or following those things. And I mean, I think what's interesting here is that like this is kind of a way in which government runs like a corporation. Like you got to know what to ask for, you got to figure it out. And I think there's also this piece of it that is like, but there's no MPIA on corporations. There's no MPIA on the Rockefeller Foundation. Like we can send the governor of Maryland a thing that says, tell us about your deal with the Rockefeller Foundation, and they have to begrudgingly comply. If we send something to the Rockefeller Foundation or Anthropic that asks them that, they're going to just buzz off. You know, they don't care. They're not responsible to us. We're not their shareholders, nor are we the ones that are funding them. So there's this place where government has this sort of unique space where government is actually responsible for providing this information to people. And I think it's really good that you're pushing them to provide the information, and that, you know, I think you can be like, look, come on, like, you've got to have this document. You say you have to have this document. Where is it? You know?
Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's something I've heard about a shortcoming of MPIA is that it doesn't have a lot of teeth, right? You talked about, oh, we'll get it to you missing these legally required deadlines, and that, you know, there isn't a penalty for missing that, right? So I think that's we could have a stronger MPIA, right? That could be an interesting bill to try to get introduced in a future legislative session. Is how do we strengthen this existing mechanism so it works even better for people to hold government accountable. But what would your advice be as a new MPIA-er for other folks around the state who are thinking about using this tool in their activist toolkit?
I mean, I think my advice is just try it. Just try it. Like, it's very low stakes. I think, there are fees associated with asking for stuff. Sometimes in every request I sent, I asked for a fee waiver because this is for public benefit. It's not for commercial purposes. And they've respected that so far. So this has cost me $0 to get this information. But I think the only way to learn the system is just by doing it. And I also think it's healthy for the state to have to deal with people asking for stuff. I think, I don't know. It's like I joke that I'm nosy, but I feel like we all should be more nosy about the government. Like, there's a lot going on up there that, that plays directly into our activism efforts and political stuff and just daily lives.
I think we've got two 2026 slogans coming out of this tonight. One is climate and seasons. We actually like them, or whatever we said earlier. And the other one is like, we need to be more nosy about the government, right? Yeah. Like, we need to, and it's like, I think there's a lot of times where people will ask the government something and the government will say, well, this is how it works. And it's like, okay, can you show me the law or the regulation that causes it to work that way? Or did you all just decide it works that way? And oftentimes the answer is, we just decided it works that way.
Yeah, totally. And I think too, I don't know, I think were I coming from a news outlet or some, having organizational backing or something, like, probably if something big was omitted, or if something, if they missed a big deadline or something, like that could be a lawsuit, probably. Like, I'm not a person who has the means or the time or the energy to do that, but like, yeah, and they probably know that. So like there's that aspect of it too. Like, again, kind of goes to that it doesn't have a lot of teeth. There's not a lot there that you can do to dispute it.
I will be fascinated to understand what their response to you is now that we've done this show, and they're surely watching. The people in the MPIA office and the governor's office, if you're watching right now, hey, that's
some of the tech bros, right? Aren't some of the tech bros creeping around?
Yeah.
So yeah. If you're from General Catalyst, if you're from Percepta, if you're some Claude agent that's sent to watch this show and report back to the mothership,
Oh, yeah, that's it. They just like scrape the transcript and are feeding it into their Palantir machine as we speak. So
yeah. And speaking of that, like part of building on the conversation we had with Seth last week about where the campaign is using AI tools and where these tools have the opportunity to be democratically helpful. Some of the tools that you're using to do these big deep dive researches into these databases and things like that are commercial AI tools, and that they're helping you for the research. What's the potential here? How can AI help people in grassroots campaigns hold power and government accountable?
Yeah, this is a fascinating aspect of it to me, because I don't like Andy and I have had so many conversations about AI, and Andy knows I very much have been a hater and have like only kind of in recent months come around to like, oh wow, this can do some stuff. And so yeah, the tools that I've built are I'm ironically using Anthropic's Claude code to investigate Anthropic. So like it's I think there's so much talk about commercial AI putting so much power into the hands of people who have a lot of power already. So employers who are using that as an excuse to take employment away from people, or giving businesses access to talent without giving people access to wealth in exchange for that talent. So I think there's so much on that side of the fence too that still is worth discussing and considering. Again, kind of going to that my history of having to take in new information and revise my opinions. Like this is one area where I see, I don't know, like I get into the little bit of contrarian mindset where I'm thinking like, well, here are all these government entities who are using stuff like Palantir and all of these huge kind of AI driven analysis surveillance companies, which work by vacuuming up as much data as they possibly can that no human could possibly go through. So that might be, your travel history based on Flock's license plate cams, or your internet browsing history, or what you buy at the grocery store, or whatever. Like there's so many data sources and data points about what we do all day that they're able to just pull in bulk and use AI to sift through that and pull out patterns and pull out behaviors and use it to target people and use it to surveil. We can do the same thing. That's been my kind of epiphany. There's a comment in the chat, like the government audits us, so why can't we audit them? Like that's how I feel about it. I'm kind of like, well, I'm like almost building this little mini Palantir machine where I'm like vacuuming up data from campaign finance and vacuuming up procurement data and vacuuming up MPIA stuff and communications and news articles and everything else, and using AI to draw those connections. And I think we, my problem solving brain of like being able to ask the right questions and pull the right information is still very much in charge. But rather than spending my time spelunking through 25 databases trying to find what I need, I'm able to kind of put that off onto AI and focus on the stuff that matters. And so even when we get all this documentation back from the state about like in response to the MPIA request, the first thing I do is feed it into my research project that has all of the context about the stuff I've already researched and looks at all the documentation and pulls out, conclusions and patterns and stuff, which are all cited, so I can go back to the primary source and verify that stuff. But it just shifts the time and the focus away from like the kind of grunt work of pulling together all the information, and frees my brain up to ask the questions and to put the stuff together. So
yeah, and one of the things that I think is most impressive about the tools that you build is the ability to link these different databases together. So one of the things that we're able to do at this point is, if we are looking at a bill that had an unusual response in Annapolis, we can go look at who testified on that bill. We can go look at who donated to who lobbied on that bill using the lobbying disclosures. We can see who donated to the people who are in charge of that committee. We can see all of these things relatively quickly at a glance. And it's not that we couldn't find them on our own, but like, it's a pretty time-intensive commitment to dive through all those things, especially when you might be wrong about going down one of these leads. So if you're getting off of a hard work day and you're trying to, fit it into like a 50-hour week, like a lot of people are working this time, and you go down a wrong path on one of these things, right? Like, that's your week blown, right? Whereas the AI tools can dig into the stuff, find it, and if it goes down the wrong path, it goes down the wrong path. But it is like, oftentimes it goes down the right path. And we're starting to find all sorts of connections that I think goes back to the point that if everybody on your campaign team is a seasoned Annapolis hand, it will see a person on a testimony list or in a lobbying disclosure, and they will know exactly who those connections are and that type of thing. They've got this sort of tacit insider's knowledge about who the players are that we may not have on our campaign, but the data doesn't lie on these things. And if you can string together these public databases in a way that starts to tell those stories, we start to have the ability to see who's buying outcomes in Annapolis, who's buying outcomes from the governor's office, and to be able to point that out. Another thing I want to point out here that I'm kind of excited about, and I will give a preview of, but I don't want to go too far into, is the current way that the State Board of Elections campaign finance database works is that people only get fines and fees if somebody sees something and says something. Well, there's a whole bunch of data there. And there's a whole bunch of data that has pretty good rules that we can bounce it against. So one of the things that we have in prototype right now is the ability to look through that data with an AI tool in order to be able to figure out where the violations are in a systematic way. This is something the State Board of Elections should be doing.
I was going to say, like, it begs the question of, like, why aren't we using our wonderful partnership with Anthropic to be doing that? I mean, right. I think the answer is obvious, but, it's
I think the answer is obvious in that case. Like, they'll be happy to have it fulfill the abundance agenda by approving housing permits more quickly, or fulfill some other agenda by denying people benefits. They say it won't do that, but it's going to do that. But where is it climbing through campaign contributions to find all sorts of shady stuff that all sorts of elected officials are doing? So I'll leave it at that. That's a little bit of a preview of something that might be happening in 2026. But
I just would add, I see it as leveling the playing field in a couple interesting ways. I mean, one is leveling the playing field a little bit between a campaign that has $4 million in the bank and a campaign that right now has $4,000 something in the bank. We can use these tools to level the playing field between those type of campaigns. But I think it also, we've talked a lot about how nonprofits play kind of access politics and gatekeeper politics in Maryland state advocacy circles. And one reason that people who know where some of those skeletons are don't take them out of the closet is because they would lose their access. But if we're using these tools to find out, where the dirty laundry is, and we're not playing access politics, we don't really care how quickly the committee chair responds to our email, then that could be a real game changer for a more direct and potentially impactful form of challenging power in Annapolis. But but I mean, we've been talking about the positives. What are some potential limits or pitfalls of these tools in the campaign space or in general?
I think, I mean, well, I think there are many. I think, like, as you know, for every good side of the coin, there's a bad side of the coin too. I think there, as anyone who's used LLMs for any substantial period of time knows, like, they make mistakes, right? Like they can send you down a rabbit hole that might not be there. They can have bias. They can, you know, point you in directions that are questionable. And so I think that's where like the critical thinking aspect of it comes in, where you know, we can overlay, we can take their, like, I think of my tools, I guess, as a partner. It's like we are partnering in this research, meaning like you can say something that I disagree with and vice versa, or like I might challenge it on certain conclusions that come out of it. I think there's sometimes a sense that, you know, you should just be able to like ask AI a question and AI will spit out, you know, an answer perfectly every time. And if it doesn't do that, then it's garbage. I think it's less that and more like, let me use my brain to direct this and let me try to, you know, take the output with a grain of salt too, and check my sources and make sure that, you know, if it's using hyperbolic language or dramatic language around something, like maybe trying to, you know, train it not to do that sort of stuff. Like, I think there are, and like, I mean, I guess this isn't a limitation, but it is something that I kind of grapple with, is like, it's still using AI. Like it's still, you know, it's still burning up energy at the data center and water and everything else. And so I still have a lot of conflicting feelings about that type of stuff. I'm sure we'll get into it kind of in a future show, but like thinking about how to, I guess the way that my opinion has shifted on it is more like, I now do actually think the technology is pretty revolutionary. I now do think it's actually got a lot of practical applications. And now we need to figure out how to do that in a way that scales, that doesn't harm communities, that doesn't result in what we're seeing with all of the data centers that are popping up. How can we use better chips? How can we use locally run models that use less horsepower? So like, not a limitation of the tool, but just like a I don't know, a downside, I guess, or a thing to be mindful about. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and I think too, you know, the world of like all of these AI companies are also selling this stuff right now at very much below cost. I think that's part of their model, is like it's costing them a lot more money than we're paying for it. Which is kind of the way of Silicon Valley. So it's just like Uber, you know, or anything like that, or Airbnb, where it's like they're charging these insanely low prices to make a bunch of industries dependent on them, and then they will jack it up at some point. And, you know, once we've been locked into our vendors, then, you know, we're kind of on the hook for whatever. So I see that being a potential limitation or pitfall, as, you know, we get to be more dependent on those tools.
Or decrease quality, right? I think sometimes we notice the price tag going up, but the other thing they do is they stop, you know, they let the quality decline because they stop investing in the maintenance of it.
Totally. Yeah. Or they just like invest in stupid stuff. Like I work in tech. That's like part of my interest in technology, is I spend my days working in tech. So it's like I see that life cycle too, of like the company sees a new shiny object over here, or, you know, they run out of things to build, and so then they just start making things up that don't make sense and actually make the product worse. So like I don't think this is going to be any exception to that. I also suspect we're going to see a bubble pop at some point. I don't know what that looks like. I don't think that's going to be, I don't think we're going to put the toothpaste back in the tube when it comes to LLMs, but I think we are building out a lot of research infrastructure right now that, you know, might shift and change and become more expensive or worse over time. So like, I think that, you know, that's a risk there as well.
Yeah, totally. And look, I mean, I think that I really appreciate you getting into the nitty gritty of how you're using this right now, what the limits are, and what the ethical concerns are, because they're real, right? Like, it is not without cost to do a search that goes through the campaign finance database in order to find who donated to a bill or to a person that vetoes a data center study. Ultimately, I think that these things have to be solved by policy and by social movements that demand something better and that deserve something better. But we have to, while we can't say, aha, we did good with it, therefore we don't need to worry about the ethical concerns of it. We need to be balancing that and working on it. And I think we can have another show where we get into the wonky weeds about small language models and like agnostic and different types of data centers and that type of thing. But I think what the point that we were making last week is that it does not have to be this way, where major foundations are working with government in order to facilitate the growth of corporations by using these sort of people destroying tools. We can have the technology geared toward good and geared toward just democratic societies, but we have to have a political program that goes along with it in order to make that happen, because that's not the way that arc is going to bend on its own. We have to have the force and the power of political movements that make sure that those are the outcomes that we get. And I think we can talk about this at the really granular level, like, well, we use this tool in order to do this, Y, and Z. And that is very important. And I think there's a lot of folks out there who would want to hear that. And we have to grapple with the ethical and political questions at the same time. So I really appreciate you diving in to how this ties together as part of the work you're doing. And if we go back to that point that I was making earlier, that is like, look, Ralph Nader helped to create this kind of government transparency. The corporations and the governments decided to respond to it by dumping a ton of data on people and making so much unstructured data available as their means of working through transparency that they got the upper hand, because they could hire the research teams and the law firms and those folks to dive through all of this stuff, while the three of us would be stuck most of the time. And these tools become a leveling device that allows us to reclaim that spirit of the 70s, when transparency was the thing that was holding government accountable, as opposed to transparency being a thing that bogged down activists. And so I'm really excited about that part, and I want to continue having that discussion as we go into 2026. But I want to take a step back, get out of the AI weeds, get out of the MPIA weeds, and ask you, Christy, what is one big thing you're excited to work on for this campaign in 2026?
I mean, so many things, but I think I am so interested in chasing down these types of stories. Just like we focused on one tonight, there are 12 more in the backlog. Like we've got horse racing, we've got data centers, we've got all kinds of stuff happening. And like, I think I'm so eager to see how this plays out with a third-party candidate potentially on the debate stage. Like, I think another thing I've been, working with y'all on is a position around, data privacy policy packages and things like things that are like pretty near and dear to my heart. And it's been I think one of the other aha moments I've had through this experience too is this idea that like, if you're allowed on that stage with them, and you come in with a good command of what is going on with data centers, what's going on with privacy policy, what trends are, like what the position should be, like it's going to force the conversation. Like that is like so much of the power, I think, of a campaign and a movement like this, is just having that representation, which I think Owen was mentioning, like if they have to worry about losing votes on the left side as well as the right, like I think it can have a big impact. And I think I'm excited to see how that kind of stuff takes shape, and to continue learning from you guys about coalition building and all of the incredible like people you all have in your orbit. Like I think, I think there's just, it's like I don't know, it's like a feast of ideas. That's like the cheesiest way to put it, but I don't know. It's just like, it's very good stuff for my brain to crunch on. And I'm eager to just keep doing that work.
Christy, we are eager to do that work with you. Thank you so much for the work that you've done from the beginning of this. Thank you for coming on tonight and talking about it. And thank you for like digging in to the roots of this deal and having the sort of drive to get to the documents that you're getting to. It's really helpful. It's the type of thing that we need in order to be able to expose the money trail and expose the paper trail for how the decisions are getting made for us. They're not getting made by us, and they're not getting made for us, but they're getting made by government, which is responding to elite interests and corporate interests in order to do their bidding. And the only time that people get what they want out of it right now is when their agendas align with what the corporations and the elites want. And I think what you're doing is helping us to create a realignment where government's job is to serve the people and for us to audit them, not for them to audit us, to return the power back to the people and to make sure that we can ask the right questions, that we can get the data, and that we can hold them accountable for what they're doing in daylight, and make sure that people know who's buying the outcomes that we're getting in government. So thank you so much. I really appreciate having you here. It was a great show. Owen, anything before Christy leaves?
Thanks for being with us. Thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for being part of this campaign.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. It's been fun to chat.
It has, and you're going to get one more of these before we let you go.
Thank you.
All right, Christy, have a good night. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, well, that was awesome. I love these interviews that we're doing with our team members because they have really useful and fun stories to tell, and I think that they have a perspective that is not captured in most campaigns, certainly not on shows like this. And it's just like we're working with awesome people who do awesome stuff.
In a pretty non-hierarchical space, right? I think traditional campaigns are uber cutthroat and top-down and controlled, and usually someone has an idea. We're like, yeah, let's do that, And so I think, I think what you say, it's a feast of ideas. It's like, yeah, and it's buffet style, just like what people want to do, as long as it fits within Green Party values. And we have some priorities that we're working towards, but there's a lot of I'm famous for my lateral energy, and there's a lot of lateral energy in the campaign, and that's cool and that's healthy, and folks are developing new skills because they're following their passion, and that leads to good work that helps us meet some of our other goals.
Yeah, and I mean, I love the fact that we have folks that have I love the fact that we have folks that have lateral skills, and we have folks that have like deep dive research skills. It's really a good and useful. It's a really good and useful set of skills to have for the campaign. So this is the last show we have of the year. And is there any? I'll ask you the question that I asked Christy. What are you excited to work on? What are you excited to show Marylanders in 2026?
I think the debate bill is going to be really key and really fun to work on for the next 3-4 months. I think we can set expectations realistically on how far the bill gets, but doing the media part of that campaign, I mean, we've talked about the capacity of the mainstream media since the Great Recession in this show and other shows, but there are a lot of great journalists out there, and I like talking to them. I like, texting and having off the record or on background conversations with them. And so I'm interested in doing the communications plan related to this piece of legislation that 2 Green Party guys working with a really good coalition got introduced in the Democrat supermajority House of Delegates.
Yeah, and alongside that, I had a conversation with a Republican delegate staffer yesterday about another bill that I think we're going to push to get introduced in the General Assembly that alters the Maryland Constitution in order to address something that has been there since 1864. So it's like we are doing. I had this conversation with State Senator Charles Sidnor last year at one point, and I kept saying, we got a 2-party system, and he kept sort of looking at me incredulously and saying, well, like, you're here and you're doing stuff. We have a multi-party system, and I think that phrasing and that explanation was really helpful for me to understand like what it is. We're here doing stuff that is getting legislation introduced. We're altering outcomes, and we're putting pressure on the government in order to be more transparent and to do what it needs to do for folks. And so that's where my focus is.
Yep. All right, so we're taking a couple of weeks off, but we'll see you back in January. We've got a really exciting show planned for the 14th. We're still working on our guest for the 17th, but I mean, Andy, can I share our guest for the 14th at this point?
Sure, go ahead.
All right, so for the first ever sitting Green delegate of the House of Delegates, Shane Robinson, former delegate, current teacher. I gotta have a lot of love for my fellow teacher over there. He's going to come on the show. He's going to give us sort of a insider's perspective, former insider's perspective, although he was always kind of on the ramparts in the House of Delegates, of what to expect, what to look for in the legislative session based on his lived experience as one of the people making those votes on the floor and in committees in the House of Delegates. So look forward to that January 14th. I know a lot of advocates and policy folks miss Shane's work in the House of Delegates. And so having him on will give us a lot of insights into what we should be looking for, what we should be working on. And also one last shout out, this Saturday, there's going to be a protest in front of Baltimore City Hall, a protest against the outrageous rates that BGE is charging. So if you can be there noon, Baltimore City Hall this Saturday, the 20th, and it's being organized by Sunrise Baltimore. So that's my last plug for the year.
Yeah, and on January 7th, we're going to have Matt Stannard, who is a good friend of the show. He's going to come on and help us talk about debate and the solidarity economy and public banking and some of the other great things that Matt has contributed to our platform in the past. I'm really looking forward to that conversation. Today, I had a conversation with my friend Steve Yano, and Steve Yano wrote a scholarly book about presidential debates, and we're going to talk about what it would mean if we were in the debates at some point. We've got some other folks coming in February that are going to talk about issues of war and peace and global nuclear weapons and things like that. So there's a lot of good shows that we have coming up in the next year. And I want to give a shout out. Tomorrow night, I will be on a GPUS live stream, which is why Bo's here in the chat complaining. I'm going to be on a GPUS live stream tomorrow night talking about the way that the Green Party can organize in order to fulfill the needs of people across the country. It'll be hosted by Dr. Jill Stein and Dr. Butch Ware, and it will be at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and I hope to be able to see you all there, as well as see you here with the next version of the show we do. So with that, thank you so much for a wonderful show, a wonderful 2025, and we will see you in 2026, and have a good night.
Happy New Year, everyone.